We're into the final week of the Tata Steel Masters and 3 players share the lead. Shahriar Mamedyarov, Magnus Carlsen and Anish Giri. So let's take a look at how Anish Giri got on in round 9. He had the black pieces and was playing Maxim Matlakov, who's the European individual champion. He's from Russia and no pushover, though he's not set the tournament on fire so far. It's a Reti, very solid from white, and Giri is playing a very well respected system with black. So the bishop comes out early and he sets up with this kind of Slav pawn formation which blunts that bishop on g2. Castles from white, knight d7. White pushes the bishop, but bishop comes back to h5, no harm done. And now white has a big choice here. You can play c4, b3, d3 and e4. But Matlakov played d4, very solid. e6, c4. And now very quickly Giri played bishop e7, which is, I think, an accurate move order. If black plays knight f6, normally you should bring out your knights before your bishops. But in that case, white exchanges on d5 and then plays queen b3, attacking the pawn here. And if queen b6, then the queen switches across to e3, check very quickly. And that's a little bit uncomfortable for black. The pin is annoying and there's a threat to play knight f5. So Giri played bishop e7 straight away. And now, well, Giri himself with white has played queen b3 here, but that he didn't get anywhere after queen b6. You can also take on d5. Knight e3 is the most interesting move, actually. And this turns into a gambit. So Giri took on c4. He doesn't have to. You could play knight f6. And instead of trying to recover this pawn, Matlakov simply gambited the pawn with b3. And, well, already black has to be quite careful. You can see the queen threatens the b7 pawn. And if rook b8 to defend, then bishop f4 hitting the rook. That's very annoying. So, and you don't want to play b6 because that would weaken the c-pawn too much. So queen b6. But now queen a4. Good move, because we're just stepping out of the way for the rook. Knight f6 from Giri. Now, he thought for 18 minutes over that move, so clearly he wasn't too familiar with this line. Rook b1, attacking the queen. The queen steps back. The bishop comes forward, hitting the queen. The queen has to step back again. And white already has pretty decent compensation. And if Matlakov had played queen b3, this would have been very uncomfortable for black. So b7 attacked. You don't want to advance the b-pawn. After rook c1, you can see, well, the placement of bishop and rook make life very uncomfortable for black. So knight b6 would block. Now black wants to play a knight to d5 to trade pieces, but after e4, that stops that. And then a4, and well, white just has a tremendous initiative here. This is really not pleasant at all. You can see that white has basically started the middle game, and black's king is still in the middle, so black hasn't quite completed his development yet. It's as simple as that. Good compensation for white. But in this position, instead of queen b3, Matlakov played rook fc1 after 25 minutes thought. Now perhaps he thought he was going to transpose to that line, but actually after castles, queen b3, and it looks the same, but here Giri cleverly flicked in bishop g6, hitting the rook. So the rook stepped up. And Giri simply played rook d8. He didn't bother defending b7, and the problem is, from white's viewpoint, after queen takes b7, then black has bishop a3, winning material. So this pawn is immune for the time being. So Matlakov played a4. Well, it could be useful if one day a knight comes to b6 and you want to push it away, but it's a5. Black can sometimes use the b4 square to play a bishop there, or maybe sometimes even a knight there. Knight d2. Now, white still has compensation for the pawn here. That knight is swinging around c4, and this is a good move. So Giri played knight h5, knocking the bishop from that really beautiful diagonal, and he just came back again. So this was in fact a tacit draw offer. So Matlakov could simply come back, and I have no doubt that in this position Giri, under pressure, would have repeated the position with knight h5. But instead Matlakov played knight c4. He's going for the win, and I think rightly so in this position. And yeah, this knight finds a really nice square. So knight d5 from Giri, he simply gives the pawn back. So there is now, because, sorry, let me just go back. With the knight on c4, I beg your pardon, with the knight on c4 protecting a3, then of course bishop a3 is no longer possible. Therefore queen b7 is a threat. And if a move like rook a7, that's not pleasant. d5 opens up that diagonal, for example. So knight d5, Giri is trying to exchange pieces, maybe sink a knight or a bishop on b4. Indeed, after queen b7, bishop b4 happened. So Giri has returned this pawn, but at least he has a solid anchor for his pieces on b4, and things aren't so bad. Queen takes queen, and now rook c8. Rook takes queen, and the knight comes back to a2. So white still has some pressure here. You can see that's potentially a weak pawn. There's some pressure here as well, and well, white's pieces stand pretty well. The bishop was taken. Now if, well, obviously knight takes knight, bishop a3 again, so pawn takes. So that means that, I mean, white's pawns have been damaged. His pieces are still very strong. The bishop can't retreat. There are going to be some problems here, and or indeed a rook maybe a rook coming down first. This is an unpleasant position. So Giri played c5, and Matlakov played knight d6, and well, it looks like he missed a good move here. Rook d1, and this is a very subtle move. One thing is it gets out of a potential pin on the c file. So after c takes d4, let me show you this. Knight takes. If pawn takes knight, rook takes. And simply a5. And that pawn, supported by this beautiful bishop, is going to be very, very hard to stop. Or after rook d1, pawn takes, knight takes. Now if rook takes knight here, then knight c6 and rook takes d4, and white has a very pleasant initiative here. You can see this is looking very weak indeed. White is better. So rook d1, a very subtle move indeed, not easy to spot. That would have been strong. Instead, Matlakov played knight d6, but this throws away his advantage. After bishop a3, knight takes, bishop takes rook, whoops, knight e7 check, and he traded off. Now, material for the moment is even. However, the knight at the moment is quite poorly placed on a2. These pawns look very suspicious to me. So white has to be careful here. Bishop c6. And now a rook c8, and this pin is uncomfortable. Not fatal, but it's uncomfortable. e3, that just keeps everything protected, that's fine. King f1, also okay. Bishop d6, now that's a bit of an annoying move. And here, well, white should step up. This is the best move, king f2. Let me show you this one. And the basic idea is to bring this knight round to this important square here. And that covers b4, for example. Or, let me see, after this, f5. Once again, knight c1, very important. And knight b3, and white gets there just in time to support the bishop, and white has enough to make a draw there. Tactics are important here. You can see that in this position, at the moment, black can't play knight b8, or at least it's not very good, because the bishop can come back to e4 to protect the rook. And that's why black is first playing f5. But it's still tricky. Knight b8 also not possible here, again because of bishop e4. And if black takes, then the rook is on pre. So through these tactics, that's why black had to play rook c7 first to make sure that rook was protected. So through tactics, white can actually survive here. But instead of king f2, Matlakov played g4, then knight b6, and here, if white tries knight c1, then knight d5 attacks the pawn on e3 and threatens knight b4 as well, so black wins material. So basically in this position, white does not have time to spin the knight round to a better position, and that knight is really poorly placed on a2. I mean, king f2 is still probably a reasonable move, but rook c1 played. You can see Matlakov is making sure the rook is defended, because he wants to get out of this pin. But then bishop a3, and Giri keeps hassling that rook. So now if the rook goes back to c2, then knight d5, and, well, white is losing a pawn in this position, and that should be sufficient for black to win. So let's go back here. So bishop b4, this is very uncomfortable. Matlakov took on b4, but now he is lost because that b pawn is just too strong. Game finished like this, and now knight d7. And here Matlakov resigned. If, well, let me see. Bishop takes knight, then black trades and the b pawn goes through. And if rook back, you can take this. If rook takes, then the pawn goes through. You can see the b6 square is covered. And after rook takes, then, well, black is a knight up and can clear things up very easily. That was an important win for Anish Giri, because all the other games in the tournament were drawn. But the games weren't too interesting today. Probably the most interesting game was Garwin Jones against Ho Yifan. Both players played really, really sharply. It was a very, very interesting game. But other games not too interesting. Carlsen drew with black against Anand. Mamedyarov drew against Kramnik. Neither game really created much interest. So the scores after 9 rounds: Anish Giri in the lead on his own with 6.5 points. Magnus Carlsen, Shakariya Mamedyarov on 6, Kramnik and So on 5.5. Still 4 rounds to go. In the next round, Giri has white against Karyakin. Carlsen has white against So. Svidler has white against Mamedyarov. Those are the top pairings. I think Giri probably has a slightly easier run-in. After Karyakin tomorrow, he has Caruana, Adiban and Wei Yi. Carlsen has Mamedyarov, Matlakov and Karyakin. Mamedyarov after tomorrow has Carlsen, Jones and Anand. I mean, every game is tricky, but still, I think Giri's opponents haven't really had very good tournaments so far. So, with 4 rounds to go, it looks as though Giri, with a half-point lead, is the clear favourite to win the tournament.